So you probably already know that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. thinks that vaccination causes autism.
Which it f***ing doesn't.
If you didn't know that, well, now you do. And that's a pretty insane claim. It's also a view that he's been supporting for almost 2 decades now. But Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is even crazier than believing that vaccines cause autism. And not enough people talk about this. So even though I've talked about this before on my channel, I'm going to make a video dedicated solely to it because I think it's really important that people know that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is also an HIV/AIDS denier. What does that mean? It means he thinks that HIV does not cause AIDS, and that the treatments for HIV do not work, and that AIDS is actually caused by lifestyle. Don't believe me? Well, let's look at the stuff that he himself has said. Here's a video clip of him defending this idea.
Of the first 1,000 with AIDS were people who were addicted to poppers, which are known to cause Kaposi's sarcoma in rats. In the gay bars, they would be last call for poppers and last call for alcohol at 2 a.m. And there were a number of people in the agency who said, this is not a viral disease, but it's a disease that is environmental and is being caused to people who are, who are getting autoimmunity from doing these from toxins. But for Tony Fauci, it was really important to call it a virus because that made it an infectious disease. And it allowed him to take control of it.
This horrible idea that AIDS is caused not by HIV, but by lifestyle choices, specifically a gay lifestyle, as RFK Jr. explains there, is totally insane. This has been thoroughly debunked for many years. Several studies, not just from the United States, but also other countries as well, all find that the #1 predictor for you getting AIDS is being HIV positive. This is regardless of lifestyle, it's regardless of socioeconomic status. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, straight, gay. If you're HIV positive, that is the #1 predictor for if you develop AIDS. There's even a twin study where a mom who was HIV positive gave birth to 2 twins, and since it's not 100% that an HIV positive mom is going to pass HIV to all of her children, only one of the twins was HIV positive. And guess what happened to that twin? They got AIDS. The other one did not. But what I'm describing here is peanuts compared to the entire literature, the entire body of work that scientists have spent decades producing, all of which shows without a doubt that HIV causes AIDS. But Dr. Wilson, that's just an old video clip. I'm sure he still doesn't believe those things today. Yes, he does. In fact, he dedicated hundreds of pages in his book about it. I repeat, he wrote hundreds of pages supporting this idea that HIV does not cause AIDS. Oh, crap. That's pretty serious. In those hundreds of pages, he rejects the idea that HIV infects CD4 cytotoxic T-cells and depletes them, which is a hallmark of HIV/AIDS. He says that not a single study confirms this most important principle of HIV theory, that HIV destroys CD4 cells by means of an infection. This is a bold-faced lie. This has been unambiguously confirmed by experimentation. If you infect a culture of CD4 positive T-cells, the HIV virus will infect them and deplete them. And after several years of work across several different laboratories, the mechanism of how this happens was worked out. HIV uses a protein on its surface called GP120 to bind to certain cell receptors that are found on CD4 positive T-cells and enter the cell that way. If you delete these receptors or otherwise block HIV from binding to these receptors, then HIV doesn't enter the cells and the cells don't die. And again, what I'm describing here is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to all of the virology, molecular, and cell biology that has been determined over the decades that pertains to HIV and AIDS. I'm providing a ton of resources in the description so that you can look at all of this research and evidence for yourself, but I haven't even gotten to the worst part yet, so let's move on. In RFK Jr.'s book, he says that when this idea was first mentioned to him by a guy named Tom Cowan, who is a guy that thinks that no viruses exist, and he thinks that the heart is not a pump. Yeah, I don't know why he considers this guy to be one of his heroes of medicine or whatever he says in his book. Anyway, it was this Tom Cowan guy who RFK Jr. says first got him interested in this topic. And then he favorably repeats the idea in his book that HIV has never been isolated. What HIV has, of course, been isolated. It's been studied intensely in vitro. We know the actual structure of the virus. We know exactly what it looks like. We know exactly the sequences that make up its genome. We know exactly the proteins that make up its capsid. And we know exactly what those proteins do. I can't even begin to accurately express how crazy this idea is. So just to recap here, not only is being HIV positive the number one predictor of whether or not you're going to get AIDS, not only does HIV exist and has been extensively characterized, and not only do we know with certainty that it infects CD4 positive T-cells and depletes them, but we also know that we can disrupt the HIV life cycle and prevent or reverse AIDS. If you directly stop the virus from doing what it's doing and you prevent AIDS, then the virus is what was causing AIDS. Today we have several antiretroviral therapies that are used to directly target enzymes that the virus depends on for replication. These medications are as close as you can get to miraculous when it comes to medicine. They have turned the horrible death sentence that HIV infection used to be to now a livable chronic condition that practically doesn't affect their quality of life at all. There's plenty of stigma involved with HIV infection, of course, but these antiretroviral drugs make HIV an infection that you can live a normal life with. And they have prevented millions of AIDS deaths. Okay, Dr. Wilson, fine. He's gotten this wrong, but all this biology stuff is really complicated anyway. He's still a smart and compassionate guy who cares about people. I still haven't gotten to the worst part. Now, I've told this story on this channel before, but in RFK Jr.'s book, he mentions an HIV/AIDS denialism activist who used to be very active in the community. Her name was Christine Magyar. He mentions her HIV/AIDS denialism activism, quoting a few of her works and quotes that she's given to media when she was alive. All of these quotes are used to support the position that he's pushing, that HIV does not cause AIDS and that it was basically a scam by Anthony Fauci. But I just said that Christine Magyar is not alive anymore. That's because she was HIV positive. In December 2008, she died of HIV/AIDS. Right up until the end, she denied that antiretroviral medications worked. She thought they were poison, so she never took them. So her HIV infection never got under control. And because of her believing this misinformation, she died. But I'm still not at the worst part. Christine was also a mother. And just a few years before she herself died, her daughter, Eliza Jane, also died of HIV/AIDS. She had passed HIV down to her daughter, and because of her beliefs, refused to do anything to help control the HIV infection inside her daughter. And it eventually took her life. Eliza Jane Scoville was just 3 years old. RFK Jr. never mentions any of this in his book. He never talks about what happened to Christine or her daughter Eliza. He simply uses her quotes and cherry picks parts of her story to help support this crazy narrative that he is pushing in this book, that HIV/AIDS was all a scam. And finally, the worst part is that Eliza and Christine are not isolated situations. The amount of harm caused by these beliefs is immeasurable, particularly in South Africa when President Mbeki, who from about 1996 to 2001 was completely swayed by these HIV/AIDS denialism ideas. And he was convinced by someone who RFK Jr. touts as a hero in his book. But this hero, quote unquote, was responsible for the South African president completely denying that HIV needed to be treated with antiretrovirals. And as a result, his people suffered, and an estimated millions died, preventable deaths from AIDS. And the ripple effects of that kind of policy, which stemmed from blatantly crazy anti-scientific beliefs, still can be felt today. There are several countries in Southern Africa that are still heavily afflicted by HIV/AIDS, and AIDS orphans are all too common. But RFK Jr. seems to be just fine pushing this crazy idea. I'll probably never talk to RFK Jr., but I hope that reporters who do have the opportunity to talk to him challenge him on this specific idea. I hope they ask him why he didn't talk about what happened to Christine Magyar and her daughter Eliza. I hope they ask him if he really thinks that HIV does not cause AIDS. And I hope they really ask him to defend those ideas with science and data, because those things certainly are not on his side. There is no excuse for spreading those kinds of beliefs. And he spread it in the clip I showed in this video, he spread it in his book, and he continued to repeat those ideas on his appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast, which had tens of millions of listeners. These ideas are absolutely crazy and can cause nothing but harm. And RFK Jr. needs to be challenged on it, and not enough people are talking about it. So that's going to be this week's video. I hope you enjoyed the little character I added. That was just me trying to lighten up this video because it is so heavy and I do get so upset talking about it. And as always, all of the links to all of the science that I'm mentioning in this video are going to be in the description below. So again, please feel free to check those out if you're interested. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.